If you haven't been lived under a rock, you probably have heard of Bonnie Blue, the fearless, unstoppable, strong and independent woman who didn't just conquer the world, she clapped and swallowed it. She is a modern-day icon. She has brought nothing but honor to her family, single-handedly taking the essence of over 1,000 men in glorious hand-to-hand horizontal bedroom combat. Some call her degenerate. I call her the Clappertron 1000. Most people wouldn't accomplish anything after 12 hours in bed, but not Bonnie. She is stronger than any superhero you can think of. Not even Superman could take that kind of pounding for 12 hours straight. And she did it without gloves, without wearing her panties on the outside, or any panties for that matter. No headgear, no cape, just raw, unfiltered chaos. She has defeated so many men. Even Thanos would have to snap 3 times just to catch up. She has not just earned a name, she has become it. STD, Supreme Throat Dominator. Joking aside, let us focus on a more serious topic. Why is it that we naturally disrespect or shame people like Bonnie Blue? Today, I want to unpack some of the reasons behind that instinct, and hopefully by the end, you will have a better understanding of why shaming culture exists and why it is actually productive for a society to have one in place. In today's chaotic world, we are constantly being bombarded by brainwashing content online, content that is trying to undo our biological programming and strip away our common sense. Most of us barely get a chance to sit back and spend time with that part of ourselves which is conscious and reflective, to actually think about this journey that we call life. I created this channel to explore some of life's deeper questions with like-minded people who are just trying to make sense of things. But obviously, I would never explore quite as deep as Bonnie does. If you are into my no bullshit, no fluff, straight to the heart kind of content, then hit subscribe and like so that we don't lose each other in the YouTube algorithm. Thank you. First of all, let us try to understand why every human civilization that has existed throughout history has had some form of shaming culture. Human beings have learned, through countless experiences and disasters, that there are certain rules and principles which we need to follow if we want to protect ourselves and avoid watching our society collapse. The problem in the West is that a bunch of feminist politicians have tried to blur the lines between shaming and bullying. This is a typical feminist tactic, one that does not even try to analyze the cause of anything, but instead focuses only on the emotional result. A big part of their so-called ideology is built on the idea of equal outcomes, which basically means that if 2 people end up feeling bad, then the cause that made them feel that way does not matter. That's why to them, someone who cries after being shamed for doing something shameful is no different from someone who cries after being innocently assaulted. And that is the same twisted logic that leads them to demand equal pay without ever taking a serious look at the difference in effort that is actually being put in. The term shaming culture became more widely known after it started gaining traction around 2015 in online conversations about harassment and public humiliation. But long before that, feminists were already throwing around terms like slut-shaming and body-shaming. When you actually stop and think about it, the so-called shaming culture is nothing more than a protective mechanism that is wired into society. It is a way for people to defend themselves and warn others not to repeat the same damaging mistakes. These mistakes, by the way, usually come with consequences that are not only negative, but sometimes irreversible. Removing shaming from a culture is like removing the immune system from a body. It opens the door to every infection, every weakness, every kind of collapse. And sadly, that is exactly what is happening right now in the West. However, I don't want people to walk away from this video thinking that only women should be shamed. As a matter of fact, men are constantly being shamed as well, both online and offline. So it is not a concept targeting women only. The funny thing is, feminists would line up to criticize you for saying anything negative about a woman, but women shaming men openly, unfairly, and unreasonably on all major social media platforms is apparently okay. Funny how that works, right? To understand why most functioning societies around the world would shame someone like Bonnie Blue, we need to take a step back and talk about biology. From an evolutionary standpoint, men have always faced one brutal truth, which is that we can never be entirely sure of paternity. That one fact creates enormous evolutionary pressure that pushes men toward favoring sexual partners who have lower promiscuity. The reason is simple. It lowers the risk of spending your entire life protecting and investing in someone else's child. Charles Darwin, the man behind evolutionary theory itself, explained this idea when he said, "The chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man, attaining to a higher eminence. And this is chiefly the result of selection." Translation: men were historically selected not because of feelings, but because of function, their ability to survive, provide, and protect. fMRI studies have shown that male brains respond to female promiscuity with higher amygdala activity, which is basically a signal for threat or disgust, while showing less activity in the brain's reward centers compared to how they react to women who are perceived as chaste. And when you remember that men have historically been the primary providers and protectors of their communities, all of this makes even more sense. It is not just some outdated morality. It is biological programming that evolved over thousands of years in response to real survival needs. Richard Dawkins puts it bluntly: we are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. The gene does not care about your freedom or your empowerment. It cares about survival. And if your behavior puts that at risk, it will trigger the warning system, also known as shame. If a woman is promiscuous, she reduces her man's certainty about paternity. That causes the man to pull back. He becomes less willing to protect and provide, not only for her, but also for any children involved. That increases death rates, lowers birth rates, and creates a ripple effect that, when it spreads across a population, will eventually lead to societal collapse. This is not a morality issue. It is a survival issue. That is why human beings instinctively disapprove of this kind of behavior. And that is why women like Bonnie Blue, or any woman who has a high body count, will be shamed, publicly or behind closed doors, because their value when it comes to maintaining the stability of a society has dropped drastically. And the same applies to men who don't protect and provide for their family. Women have no problem calling them out, which they should, because once again, we all instinctively know that the stability of a society is important. Confucius once said, "Shame is the root of virtue. A man who feels no shame will not act justly." And honestly, when I look at what is happening today, I feel like we are producing people who cannot feel shame anymore, which means they have no internal compass, no boundaries, no virtue. There is another way to look at it. As a species, we have always built cultures that are designed to protect women. That is not some patriarchal conspiracy theory. It is because childbirth has always been a dangerous and physically punishing event. It is risky. It often leads to permanent changes in the female body, and it sometimes leads to death. Shaming in this context was a way for communities to protect women from their own short-term decisions that could lead to long-term suffering. Nietzsche once said, "What does not kill me makes me stronger, but what is too easy makes you weak." And he was right. The women who take the easy route by giving in to temptation do not become stronger, they become more hollow. And deep down, they know it. Now, of course, some raging feminists might jump in here and shout that this is sexist, or that it is a double standard. Yes, and last time I checked, biology does not give a shit about your feelings. It does not care about equality, fairness, or social justice slogans. Biology only cares about survival. What is funny is how these same people never complain about double standards when men are being sent to war or are climbing into sewer systems to keep their cities running. You never hear a word about that. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood." He was talking about men who struggle, who work, who earn, and we can apply that exact principle to women too. You want respect? Get into the arena. Stop acting like sleeping with 1,000 men is some kind of noble act. The degeneracy that is being displayed by Bonnie Blue and all the other modern garden tools is not just shameful, it is dangerous, because when this behavior scales, it leads to societal collapse. Just look at the birth rates across every developed country in the West. Every single one is below replacement level. That means that if nothing changes, these civilizations are going to disappear. And that is exactly why people's ancestral instincts are being triggered. That is why we shame these women. Not because we are mean or insecure, but because deep down we all understand the consequences of letting this shit continue unchecked. Will Durant, the historian, once said, "A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself from within." Let that sink in. We are not losing our strength because of outside enemies. We are collapsing from the inside, rotted by decadence, enabled by cowardice. There is another way to understand why we have shaming culture, and it has to do with how we assign value. Human beings naturally admire hard work. And the reason we do that is because for most of our evolutionary history, effort was a signal that you were fit to survive. When someone worked hard, they showed that they could bring value to the group, that they were capable, reliable, and resilient. This idea comes from multiple biological principles, including something called costly signaling. Work, especially hard work, functions as an honest signal. You cannot fake it. In early human societies, things like hunting, building shelter, or crafting tools took serious skill and effort. People who could do that consistently earned the tribe's trust. This is what Amos Zahavi, an evolutionary biologist, described in his handicap principle. He argued that the best way to prove your value is by taking on burdens that only the strong can carry. And researchers like Herbert Gintis, Eric Alden Smith, and Samuel Bowles have also shown that laziness was seen as a threat to group survival. That is why we still look up to people who push through resistance and show discipline. We shame people like Bonnie Blue because she chose the easy way. She chose to be lazy. She chose the path that feels good in the short term, but damages everything in the long term. Let us be real about this. For most women, it is incredibly easy to get laid. Easier than it is for even the highest value men on earth to get access to women. And women know this. They know that sex comes with biological risks, which is why the ones who resist the temptation are praised. They are seen as having more self-control, more value, and more long-term potential. Why? Because it is hard to say no to something that you can easily say yes to. Now let us look at it from the man's side. It is much harder for most men to get laid. So when a man manages to sleep with a lot of women, people often assume that he must have some form of high value, whether it is money, looks, intelligence, or status. It is difficult, so it is respected. But a man who just pays for it? Nobody respects that. Why? Because there is no challenge, no barrier, no earned outcome. But when a man has the money to pay for it and still chooses not to, that sends a different message. That says he has control. That says he knows his value. Once again, it is about saying no to the easy option. I often compare women who sleep around to men who buy women free drinks at the bar. Both are easy to do, and neither one deserves any credit. The crazy thing is, I have never met a man who bragged about how many drinks he has bought for women. Not once. But women today are out here broadcasting their body counts to millions of strangers online, like it is some kind of Olympic achievement. The point is this: shame is not about gender, it's about effort. Even if two people end up with the same outcome, we'll always respect the one who earned it more. Someone who made $10 million from the ground up is going to get a lot more respect than someone who inherited that money from their rich father. Society sees the difference. Biology sees the difference. And whether people want to admit it or not, we all feel the difference. The one who works for it is the one we trust. That's always been the case, and it always will be. Think about it. How many men would come out and openly admit they have an OnlyFans subscription? Probably not that many. Why? Because men know it's shameful. As T.S. Eliot once said, "This is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper." And that whimper sounds a lot like what we are hearing now. When strength, discipline, and restraint are mocked, while chaos, laziness, and shamelessness get applause. So here is the deal. Shaming culture gets a bad rap. Sure, it can feel harsh, maybe even unfair at times, but it is baked into who we are for a reason. It helps hold society together. It is not about being cruel or controlling. It is about survival. It is about keeping the tribe from unraveling. People like Bonnie Blue stretch every boundary, ignore every instinctive rule that evolution and tradition have carved into our DNA over thousands of years. That rubs people the wrong way. It sends alarm bells ringing, and that is exactly why the shaming shows up. Biology does not care about fairness or how empowered someone feels. It cares about outcomes. It cares about whether a society holds up or collapses under the weight of its own delusions. I mean, look, even OnlyFans had to throw in the towel. You know it's bad when the platform built on naked degeneracy looks at the chaos and goes, "Okay, this is too much for us to handle." When the king of sexual retardation starts backing off, you know society is waving a white flag somewhere deep down. If you made it this far, you were probably one of those rare people willing to think a bit deeper, instead of just swallowing the mainstream nonsense that is fed to us every damn day. And for that, respect, and thank you for rolling with me through this messy, uncomfortable truth that most people shy away from. That is all I got for you today. If you are someone who loves listening to something calm and more nutritious for your brain before you crash, please remember to subscribe, share, and like so we don't lose each other in the YouTube algorithm. See you in the comments.